Watch this.
As a city grows, so should its services. More importantly, so should its emergency services. Adding new fire stations is just one piece of the puzzle for the city of Meridian, but in this era of short-staffed, well, that doesn't seem to be a problem for finding firefighters. The report card is in, and it's one you might not want to take home to mom. Data shows a big dip in test scores nationwide. We find out how we fared in Idaho. Sand, seafood, and saltwater? It's a combination not necessarily associated with the gem state, but thanks to a question from a viewer, we learned Boise's history has some rocky and waterlogged foundations. This is a stat we throw out there all the time. The city of Meridian is the second largest city in the state of Idaho, second only to Boise. Okay, so Boise may be twice the size by population, but when it comes to emergency services like fire stations, Boise has 3 times as many as Meridian, 18 to 6. Well, that's about to change. Thanks to a kind of controversial city council approval from August of last year, Meridian is building 2 new fire stations. Controversial because while the city council approved 1 new station, it took a tie-breaking vote by the mayor to approve the second. Those opposed felt like 1 in Northwest Meridian was needed, but a second in South Meridian, well, that kind of felt rushed. But with such a dramatic increase in population the last couple of years, coupled with a dramatic decrease in response times, well, there's no question Meridian needs more fire stations. So here we are. A fire station is one thing, but firefighters to fill it, that's another matter. Meridian is hoping to lean into the phrase made famous by the late 80s baseball movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. They need 9 firefighters minimum to staff a station. And to be ready for that fall 2023 move-in date, how is Meridian Fire ramping up their hiring process now? Here's Andrew Bartline.
Writing charts, doing everything else is.
Provided a classroom setting, Meridian Fire is training new recruits, but the newest additions are far from green.
Everyone from my group is coming as lateral with previous experience.
Experience at other fire departments. It includes Jens Tapio.
Blessed to be here.
He comes from Southwest Washington, trading the Evergreen State for the high desert.
For my wife and I, we had traveled through the area a lot through the past few years, and just doing outdoor activities and seeing what this area had to offer. We really were intrigued by the area and the community. It was a easy but tough decision to make at the same time, yeah.
And the timing was everything. Meridian Fire opens 2 new fire stations in fall of 2023. The department aims to hire 30 new firefighters to keep pace with growth. That expands their department by 40%.
With that comes a lot of training, a lot of developing, and so it's an exciting time to be a part of, but there's a lot of work that comes with it as well.
That work includes hiring the right recruits. Where most industries face a labor shortage, Meridian Fire holds a wait list.
Firefighting in general is a pretty selective position. We'll get hundreds of applicants for entry-level positions, just for a couple positions.
But the groundwork for Meridian's expansion is led by 9 lateral recruits. That means they came from another department and they bring a set of advantages.
Just off the top of my head, in this academy, we've got Arizona, California, Washington represented. We do have Idaho represented. So it's a wide berth of people from across the western part of the country. It's kind of rare to have this many laterals wanting to come to one department. So again, it speaks to what we're doing here and what we got going on in the valley, that people want a part of it, to be a part of it.
A typical entry-level recruit goes through a 16-week academy. Lateral recruits are faster because they don't need to learn how to be a firefighter. They just need a 5-week training course to learn department-specific operations.
How they pull their hose, how they throw their ladders, and learning, as well, the city and how they operate.
But Meridian Fire still has their eye on rookies.
And we're currently recruiting for that because they bring a newness to the role and youth to the position. So I think it's going to be a good balance of both for us as we look to fulfill these 30 positions.
Just 3 days into the Lateral Academy, the first batch has Meridian Fire nearly a third of the way there.
I think we are coming in at a very unique time in this department. The city is going through a lot of growth. The department's growing by a third, and so being able to come in at this time and kind of be part of a pivotal or historic moment for this department is really cool.
In total, Meridian Fire is looking to fill 35 total positions. Now, 5 of those roles are administrative and executive positions. Division Chief of Training Jordan Reese says there's not a massive hurry to pull in all of these recruits all at once. You know, Brian, Meridian has a couple months to sort this out, or almost a full year, I should say, till next fall. So they say it's a better practice to slowly integrate them in over time rather than just getting a ton of people at once. And they feel pretty comfortable about their timeline to move in next fall, get those 30 positions filled.
And they had that luxury. And we were talking about this earlier. Like, there never seems to be a shortage of people wanting to be a firefighter. I mean, even growing up, being a firefighter was kind of a cool thing. But Boise, Meridian, it seems like there's a list, as you said.
There quite literally is a wait list for Meridian Fire.
That's amazing, and it's quite different than what we're seeing throughout the Treasure Valley when it comes to other positions, even in other services like police and stuff.
Yep.
So, all right, thank you very much, Andrew. All right, you've likely seen the headlines this week. Historic learning setbacks for U.S. students due to pandemic. Well, there was no question. As soon as schools were shut down in the early stages of the COVID pandemic and then prolonged with remote hybrid classes, learning progress was going to take a hit. But historic setback may have hit a little harder. The nation's report card is in, the first results since 2019, pre-pandemic. So those numbers are pretty clear on how we're doing. Joe Paris asks, how much of a hit did Idaho take? Okay, obviously we're having some technical difficulties with that story from Joe Paris. We're going to reload that and see if we can bring it to you right after the break. We'll be right back. Oceanfront property right here in southern Idaho. That's either A, the former allure of the Greater Idaho movement, B, a loose take on a George Strait classic, C, a one-time true statement, or D, all of the above. Well, the answer is D, all of the above. About 100 million years ago, Idaho was actually on the western edge of the North American continent. And that wasn't the last time the Treasure Valley was buried beneath a lot of water. Okay, so why are we bringing this up now? Well, it was all stuff we learned when we were researching an answer to a question sent in by Mike from Caldwell, who several weeks ago asked, is Bogus Basin an old volcanic caldera? Okay, so a caldera is kind of like it sounds. It's a cauldron or bowl-like crater formed after an eruption of a volcano. The magma blows out, it leaves kind of a hollow section of earth where that magma and the topsoil on top of it, where it used to be. What's left, well, that all collapses down and fills that space and kind of creates that crater. To answer that question, we looked up a geology presentation from the Bureau of Land Management about the Holes Gulch area, and we also asked Erica Rader of the University of Idaho. So, does volcanic caldera describe Bogus Basin?
Yeah, the answer is no, it is not. But that is a common thing in ski areas in some parts of, say, Colorado, which a lot of those are big calderas.
Okay, seems like a solid no. As solid as, say, granite, which is pretty prevalent around Bogus Basin, which leads to a kind of lava-layered answer to Mike's question.
So while Bogus Basin is not an old volcanic caldera, it is the root of an old volcano at some point in time.
What point in time? What connects Bogus to volcanoes? All right, let's go back a bit. About 64 to 100 million years ago, the late Cretaceous period. Oh yeah, there were still dinosaurs back then, but let's not focus on that. Let's talk about tectonic plates, because the continents were also still forming at that time. The Pacific plate was subducting beneath what would become the North American continent, meaning it was sliding underneath. And as it did that, magma was being pushed up next to it, causing the Earth to rise around it. That magma would cool as it collected near the surface, creating a batholith, the Idaho batholith, forming mountains of igneous rock or granite.
The amount of volcanic rock in the Northwest is huge.
You can still see a lot of it around the Snake River Plain because beginning about 12 million years ago, that area was being pulled apart by shifting plates like taffy, leading to a thin crust of Earth, which allowed the development of several volcanic fields from Yellowstone to the Owahis. And all that activity caused the Earth's crust to collapse there. A rift, which meant water would eventually collect there. And within about 3 million years, Lake Idaho was created. More than 200 miles long and 35 miles wide, it once covered everything below what is now 3,800 feet in elevation. Basically, you had to be a third of the way up Bogus Basin Road to be dry. Which means at one point, after the formation of Bogus Basin, Boise was actually beachfront property.
You know, that's true about a lot of places. A lot of places were beachfront property at some point in history, and might be in the future too.
And might be in the future too. Professor Rader referring to climate change, obviously, the warming global temperatures, melting of the glaciers, you know. I hope that answered your question, Mike. So how about this? You want to raise your anxiety level even more? We could see some more volcanic activity, a small kind of lava flow eruption in the Snake River Plain, about that area, the eastern Snake River Plain, otherwise known as Yellowstone supervolcano. We could see that sometime in our near future. Near future is relative, obviously. That's the sleeping giant. But Professor Rader says it's not going to just happen overnight. It's not going to just erupt. We'll kind of see it coming. There will be earthquakes aplenty, she says. The ground's going to deform, which is pretty exciting stuff for the state of Idaho, as you can imagine. But no need to lose any sleep over this sleeping giant, she says. That likely won't happen for about 10,000 years. But maybe you can count that earthquake from about 2 years ago as number one on the list, I guess. I don't know.
It is amazing to see all the snow in the Idaho mountains. I've got some shots here of the day. See more snow. We've had measurements of 3 inches or more. Of course, they had quite a bit more over this past weekend. You can see it looks like a winter wonderland here in the Sun Valley area. And the next thing to look at here is the May Marina camera, which is the McCall area beside Payette Lake. And of course, well, they've got snow in those locations. Well, the October rain with all this moisture that we've been getting since Saturday, kind of amazing to see. This is the first month of the water year of the next 12. And they start it in October because figuring that October, late fall, going into winter is going to be your biggest moisture maker month. So they start counting that toward next summer. And of course, the result would be then that when we get to next summer, all of the moisture that we've had through the fall, winter, and spring should help us to get through the summer months. So here it is, the first month of the water year. This is the amount of rain that we've had so far. We only had 1/100th of an inch this morning. Normal is 0.81, so there you go. We're above normal by 7/100ths of an inch, okay, so far. Now, it doesn't look like in our forecast that we've got much more to really add to that, but at least we're above average or above normal for the water year and the beginning of it. So 48 degrees is the current temperature, 42 in Twin Falls. Take a look at this. The wind chill in Boise was down to 40. Now it's 43. It's 33 in Twin Falls, and the wind chill was down to 29 degrees for Twin Falls just a little while ago because they have winds out of the west that gust up to 20 miles an hour. If you look over here in Boise, it's totally out of the north, and they're at 13 miles an hour, so it gives you a pretty good idea as to why we are so chilly outside. So let's talk about this. We dry up. We're still chilly tomorrow. Low tomorrow morning down to a 30. It's going to take a while to warm up. Highs will be near 60 degrees as we get through Sunday, which is looking good. Still maintaining the temperature on Monday, okay? Now in this, there's a chance of some showers later in the day. We'll have to watch that closely for your activities. And then as we get into Tuesday as well as Wednesday, we've got some of those rain showers. Temperatures cooling down next week from a 60 down to about a 48.
All right, we're going to go back to the story on the nation's report card and the historic hit to learning students have suffered across the country because of the COVID pandemic, when a big portion of several school years are either online only or some sort of hybrid. We're going to bring in Joe Paris now because you asked this question to a couple people around the state of Idaho who would know this kind of information, and also based on what we learned last night during the superintendent for public instruction debate, kind of how big of a hit did we take here in Idaho?
So every few years, there's a test that's done nationwide, and it's known as the Nation's Report Card, or the NAEP. And during that assessment, 4th and 8th graders across the country, all 50 states, they're tested on 2 different topics, reading and mathematics. And the last time this test was done was in 2019. So you can imagine, since 2019, a lot has happened, and there's been a lot of people talking about, learning loss during COVID. So they actually just put out the results for the latest NAEP. And what we saw is, expectedly, across the country and in the state of Idaho, test scores for math and reading in 4th and 8th grade, they were down across the board. Something interesting to note, though, about the state of Idaho is that they weren't as much down in Idaho as they were across the nation. And really, in 4th and 8th grade, Idaho students in math and reading are really right at the national average. Some 8th grade math scores are a little bit higher. Some 4th grade reading scores are a little bit lower. But the bottom line here is that Idaho really is right in the middle of the pack in terms of average scores just on this NAEP test. But it really rounds off a conversation about learning loss. And there's been talk for several years now where we have an idea between parents and students and administrators that there probably is some type of learning loss. Well, now we know for a fact that the data's here. And we know that 4th graders, 8th graders, and really everyone in the K through 12 and college system, they need a little bit of extra help. So last night, Brian, of course, right here on Channel 7, we had the debate for the superintendent of public instruction, Republican Debbie Crutchfield, Democrat Terry Gilbert. Now, the two debated for an hour here last night, again, ahead of the November election. And if you want to watch the whole debate before you make your decision on who you're going to vote for in a little less than 2 weeks, that's available right now, ktvb.com and the KTV YouTube page. But now that we know the data's here, we know about the learning loss, we asked both candidates last night, what is their specific plan to address learning loss? Debbie Critchfield talks about some specific curriculum ideas, while Mr. Gilbert talked about staffing the classrooms. Here's what both had to say about learning loss in Idaho.
I'm going to start off with back to basics, focusing on literacy and how we make sure that our kids know how to read. There's been significant monies put towards that, but we're still not seeing the outcomes that we have that we hope to have. Focusing on professional development and ensuring that we have valuable training for our teachers that translate into effective strategies in the classroom.
We can call upon our retired teachers to come back into the schools, work with our students, and we can ask compassionate adults in the community also to come into the schools to work. I don't think the burden should fall only on our teachers. They're overburdened now. They are overworked now. So that is my plan, to bring other people into the school setting.
So we know that as a state and really as a country over the next several years, we're going to really find out what the true effects of the COVID pandemic were in terms of learning loss and in terms of learning impacts. It's interesting, though, because we spoke with the candidates last night, you know, COVID, learning loss, all that very serious. But there's also been some things from the COVID era, the COVID pandemic era, that has changed in schools. Things like remote learning, things like different ways to collaborate across the classroom. So it'll be interesting to see whoever's elected the superintendent of public instruction, what their idea is in terms of attacking this head on. And exactly what metrics they do with that.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here with you, Joe, because you said we did not drop as far as, say, the rest of the country when it comes to 4th and 8th graders, which is where that benchmark is to kind of see where they stand in those 4 years. But is that because we didn't have that far to fall kind of thing? I mean, our test scores haven't been in the top 10.
So in the NAEP testing specifically, again, specifically the nation's report card, really for the last 10 years, Idaho's really done a good job of staying in the middle of the pack. Not too far ahead, not too far below. Of course, some years there's some outliers, but for the most part, when you talk with the experts today, Idaho's really been in the middle of the pack, really right around that average. So what the results tell us about this latest report card is that Idaho, in terms of the bell curve, hasn't changed that much. We're really the same in the pack as we have been for the last 10 years. It is interesting, though, and I did ask our experts today, you know, is it a good metric to say, well, Idaho, yes, we're down, but we're not as down. Is that a good metric? And they say it actually is, and it's a very qualified thing that's in this pandemic era, because nationwide, again, scores did go down in math and in science, in math and reading, I should say. But in Idaho, maybe not as bad in other places. So.
It's kind of what we talked about going into this, though, was like, you know, that was expected. When we shut down and said, you got to go home, and then we got to figure out how we're going to teach online with 30 kids logging in and computer issues and all, there was going to be this loss of something. We just didn't know the extent of it. But to hear this historic loss and all that, I mean, it's a good metric to go, wait a second, we've got some ground to cover here.
Yeah, and we'll see over the next few years what more metrics come out and kind of how techniques in teaching changes. Because as we saw, some had put out the idea, like everyone should have to redo the year they're in. We didn't do that. So it'd be interesting to find out when, you know, the class of 2030, when they're graduating, what do their scores look like? What does their work process look like compared to maybe the class of 2020?
All right, Joe. Thank you very much for that in-depth explanation.
Yes, of course.
Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we're going to try to figure that out. All right, we'll be right back. You know, I wanted to make a correction on a story we did earlier this week about magistrate judges. And how do you find out more about who to vote for when it comes to this election? Because they aren't campaigning, they're not really a thing that they do. I mentioned that you contact their offices to find out more about them and where they stand. I want to correct that and say contact their campaign offices, not their county offices where the magistrate judge works, but contact their campaign offices if you want to learn more or have specific questions about where they stand on certain issues and why you should vote for them. So do that if you're looking for information on a magistrate judge that happens to be on your ballot. Now let's get to your comments that you sent in for today. This one sent in from Ryan. It's great that Meridian's having such a great success in getting fire stations and firefighters to staff them. Too bad the people of Kuna seem to think getting another fire station is unnecessary. Cities across the valley are growing, and again, services are needed everywhere. Everything's kind of growing together at that point. But I'd say it was the adults that suffered the worst education loss through the pandemic, says Larry in Boise. It's a pretty good one. Appreciate that, Larry. How do you lose ground on education when you're last to begin with, asked Tim in Meridian. Well, as pointed out, Joe did, we were kind of in the middle of the pack, and we kind of shuffled a little bit, but still within the middle of the pack. So we're not really last when it comes to performance, just last when it comes to spending. Waiting list for firefighter positions. We used to always say, you know what firefighters and police have in common? They both want to be firefighters. This is Brad in Boise. Probably true. All right, that'll do it for this, well, wasn't our best show. We'll try it again tomorrow.